There was a night when you stopped breathing normally. You remember it. The air in the room had changed, and something inside you, the soft, trusting part, closed its eyes and did not open them again for a long, long time. That night, a piece of you died. And tonight, I am going to tell you what grew back in its place. Sit with me for a moment, because what I want to speak of tonight cannot be rushed. It is not a topic for slogans. It is a descent. And only those who have made the descent themselves can recognize the language of it. I speak tonight of the one who loves too completely, who feels what others cannot bear to feel, who absorbs the pain of a room before a single word is spoken. I speak of the empath. And I speak of what happens when such a soul is placed, by fate or by folly, in front of a darkness that has no bottom. The darkness of the narcissist. I do not say this to condemn anyone. I have spent my life studying the shadow, and I have come to know that the shadow is not evil in itself. It is simply unlived life, unclaimed material, cast into the basement of the self because the house upstairs had no room for it. The narcissist is a soul who has built an entire palace out of a single room and gilded its walls and convinced the world and himself that this palace is the whole of existence. But you who feel too much, who see too much, who cannot look away from another's suffering, you were drawn to that palace, not because you were foolish, because you were whole. And wholeness is always drawn toward what is broken in the hope of healing it. This is the tragedy, and it is also the beginning of something enormous. Let me tell you what happens in that house of mirrors. The narcissist does not see you. He sees a reflection of himself, and he needs you to hold that reflection steady, without flinching, without demanding anything for yourself. And you, the empath, you who were raised, perhaps, to believe that your worth is measured by how much pain you can absorb without complaint, you step into that role as though it were tailored for you. You become the container. You become the mirror holder. You become, without ever consenting to it in words, a vessel for his darkness. And here is the terrible alchemy of it. Darkness poured into a vessel does not stay where it is poured. It seeps. It stains. You begin to doubt your own perceptions, because he has told you again and again, in 1,000 small ways, that what you saw did not happen, what you felt is wrong, what you know is not true. This is not merely cruelty, though it is cruel. It is a kind of psychic warfare where the goal is to make you second guess the very organ by which you perceive reality. And slowly, you stop trusting your own eyes. I want you to understand something about this experience, because it is the hinge on which everything I say tonight turns. When you absorb another's darkness, you do not merely suffer it, you metabolize it. It becomes material inside you. It joins your own shadow, your own unlived and unclaimed parts. And for a time, you may not be able to tell which darkness is yours and which was placed there by him. This is why survivors of narcissistic entanglement so often say, in the quiet after it ends, I don't know who I am anymore. Of course you don't. You have been carrying a foreign object inside your own psyche, and no one taught you how to distinguish it from your native soil. But hear me now, because this is where the descent turns, and turns toward light. The soul does not perish from carrying darkness. It very nearly can. I will not lie to you and pretend this journey is safe, or that everyone survives it whole. Some do not survive it at all. But you did. You are here. And the fact that you are here, listening to these words, means that something in you refused to be extinguished. Something in you held a small flame in cupped hands through the entire storm and did not let it go out, even when your hands were shaking, even when the wind seemed to come from every direction at once. What is that flame? I will tell you plainly, it is the self. Not the small self, the ego, the personality that goes by your name and answers to your habits. I mean the deep self, the center of the whole psyche, conscious and unconscious together, the thing in you that is older than your wounds and will outlast every wound yet to come. The narcissist can capture your ego. He can bewilder your thinking, exhaust your nervous system, colonize your sense of worth. But the self, the deep organizing center of your being, cannot be owned by another person. It can be buried. It can be forgotten. But it cannot be extinguished, because it is not a candle lit by circumstance. It is the sun behind the clouds. And this is why survival, real survival, is never merely a return to who you were before. Do you understand this? You will never again be the person you were before you walked into that house of mirrors. That person is gone, and grieving her, grieving him, is part of the work. But in her place, something is forged that did not exist before. Something that could only be forged in exactly that fire, under exactly that pressure, and nowhere else. I have a word for this. I call it individuation. The long, unglamorous, often agonizing process by which a person becomes who they actually are, rather than who they were told to be, or who they performed themselves to be in order to survive. Individuation does not happen in comfort. It happens at the edges, in the places where the old identity can no longer hold, where the mask cracks and something underneath is finally forced into the light. Absorbing another's darkness and surviving it is one of the most brutal and one of the most reliable doorways into this process that exists. Here is what I have seen, again and again, in the souls who have walked through that fire and come out the other side. First, they stop performing goodness and they start possessing it. Do you understand the difference? Before the darkness, the empath's kindness was often a kind of currency, offered in the hope of safety, of approval, of being spared from harm. It was goodness with strings attached, goodness born partly of fear. But after the descent, after a person has looked directly at cruelty, has been lied to, gaslit, discarded, devalued, and has still chosen, in the end, not to become cruel themselves, their goodness is no longer a performance. It is a decision made with open eyes, in full knowledge of how dark the world can be. That is not naivety. That is the most sober, clear-eyed compassion a human being can possess, because it has been tested against its opposite and did not break. Second, they reclaim the shadow as their own, rather than carrying someone else's. This is delicate work, and I want to speak of it carefully, because I do not want you to hear it as blame. You did not create the narcissist's darkness. But somewhere in the process of surviving him, you likely discovered darkness in yourself too. Rage you did not know you were capable of. Coldness, the capacity to manipulate a little, to lie a little, to protect yourself with weapons you never wanted to hold. This frightens people. They think, I have become like him. You have not. You have simply met your own shadow, the part of you that had been split off and denied because it did not fit the picture of the good empath, the endlessly giving one. Meeting this shadow, owning it, integrating it, not acting from it blindly, but knowing it is there and choosing consciously what to do with it. This is not corruption. This is wholeness. A person who has never met their own capacity for darkness is not virtuous. They are merely untested. You have been tested, and you know now what you carry, and that knowledge is a form of power no comfortable life could have given you. Third, and this may be the most important, they stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. This is worth pausing on. In the house of mirrors, love was chaos. Love was the crumb after the withholding, the tenderness after the cruelty, the relief after the terror. The nervous system learned, deep in its wiring, that this rhythm, this agony followed by relief, was what closeness felt like. And so afterward, real peace can feel, at first, like absence, like something is missing. Many who have survived this kind of darkness describe a strange restlessness in healthy love, as though calm were a kind of boredom. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a scar in your nervous system, and scars can be worked with, slowly, patiently, the way one retrains a muscle after an injury. The soul that has done this work learns, eventually, that peace is not the absence of love. Peace is what love actually feels like when it is not laced with fear. I want to say something now about the darkness itself, the specific darkness of the narcissist, because I think it is often misunderstood, even by those who have survived it. The narcissist is not, in the deepest sense, a monster born fully formed. He is, almost always, a person who suffered an annihilating wound to the self at some point, often very early, often invisible even to those who caused it, and who built, in response, an entire architecture of defenses designed around one single terror, that if the mask ever slipped, there would be nothing underneath. This does not excuse his cruelty. Do not mistake me. Understanding a wound is not the same as excusing the wounds it causes others. But understanding this can free you from a particular kind of bondage. The belief that you failed to love him correctly, that if you had only been more patient, more understanding, more accommodating, you could have reached the person underneath. There may have been no person reachable in the way you hoped. The palace of mirrors is often the entire house. There is no hidden room behind it that a sufficiently loving person could unlock. This is not your failure. This was never a puzzle you were meant to solve. And here is the strange gift hidden inside this terrible understanding. Once you stop believing you failed to fix what could not be fixed, you are free to turn all of that formidable capacity for understanding, for depth, for empathy, back toward yourself, toward your own wounds, toward your own unlived life. Let me speak now of the wounded healer, because I think this image belongs to you. There is an old figure, found in many traditions, of the healer who is himself wounded, who does not heal in spite of the wound, but through it, because of it. The wounded healer knows what suffering actually feels like from the inside, and this knowledge cannot be taught in any school, cannot be read in any book, cannot be faked by anyone who has not walked through the fire themselves. If you have absorbed another's darkness and survived, truly survived, meaning you have grieved it, examined it, refused to let it curdle into permanent bitterness, you now carry a form of knowledge that is exceedingly rare and exceedingly valuable. You know the exact texture of manipulation, and so you can recognize it instantly in others and warn them and stand beside them without judgment while they find their own way out. You know what it costs to rebuild trust in your own perception, and so you can be patient with others who are still rebuilding theirs. This is not a burden only. It is also a vocation, whether or not you ever take it up formally. The world is full of people still standing in the house of mirrors, and they will recognize, in your eyes, someone who has actually been where they are. I want to be honest with you about one more thing, because false comfort is not comfort at all. It is simply a more sophisticated form of abandonment. The road I am describing to you is not finished by any particular date. There is no single morning when you wake up and the work is done, when every scar has become a strength and every wound has finished teaching its lesson. Individuation, the becoming of the true self, is not a destination. It is a way of living, a continuous unfolding, and it continues in one form or another until the end of a life. Some days, even years later, an old fear will rise unbidden, a flinch at a raised voice, a sudden collapse of self-trust when someone disagrees with you sharply, a nightmare that returns from a house you thought you had long since left. This does not mean you have failed to heal. It means you are a living psyche, not a finished statue, and living things continue to move, continue to be affected, continue, sometimes, to ache in old wounds when the weather changes. But, and this is the thing I most want you to carry out of this room tonight, the person who aches in an old wound and continues forward anyway is not the same as the person who was first wounded. There is a profound difference between suffering that has been integrated and suffering that has merely been endured. Endured suffering repeats itself blindly, drags a person into the same shape of relationship again and again, because the lesson was never metabolized, only survived. Integrated suffering becomes wisdom. It becomes discernment. It becomes the uncanny ability to sense, within the first few conversations with a new person, whether you are standing near another house of mirrors, and the freedom, this time, to simply turn and walk toward the open field instead. That is who the empath becomes in the end. Not a fragile survivor, forever defined by what was done to them. Not a hardened cynic who has decided that love itself is the danger and has closed the door on it entirely. Something else, something rarer. A person who has been all the way down into the dark basement of the human soul, their own and another's, and has come back up the stairs carrying a lamp they built themselves out of the very materials that once seemed like they would destroy them. You are not the wreckage of what happened to you. You are the architecture that was raised, deliberately, painstakingly, out of that wreckage. Every act of self-trust you have rebuilt, brick by brick, after someone tried to convince you that you could not trust yourself. That is a wall of the new structure. Every boundary you have learned to hold, even when your body still trembles while holding it, that is a doorway with a working lock, the first one this house has ever had. Every time you have chosen tenderness towards someone new, knowing full well what tenderness has cost you before, that is a window, letting light into rooms that used to be sealed. You did not ask to be tested this way. No one should have to be. But the test came, and you are standing here, and that is not a small thing. It is, in fact, one of the largest things a human life can accomplish. To be broken open by another's darkness, and to choose again and again, on ordinary days when no one is watching and no one will applaud you for it, not to become the darkness yourself. This is the quiet heroism that never makes headlines and never needs to. It is enough that you know it. It is enough that something in you, the deep old self that was never truly touched by any of it, knows exactly what you have carried and exactly how far you have come. So let this be what you take with you tonight, out into whatever house or apartment or quiet room is waiting for you. You were not destroyed. You were initiated into a knowledge of the human soul, light and shadow both, that most people will go their entire lives without ever earning. And the empath who emerges from that initiation is not smaller than the one who went in. She is not more guarded, more closed, more afraid, though she may be wiser about where she opens the door. He is not diminished, though he may finally have learned to say no. What emerges is larger, deeper, harder to fool, and yet somehow more capable of love than before, because this love, this time, is chosen with clear eyes rather than offered blindly out of fear. What emerges is a person who has been to the bottom of the well and has found, waiting there in the dark, not a monster after all, but their own reflection, tired, marked, and unmistakably, unshakably, still whole. Carry that home with you, not as a slogan, as a fact you have already lived.